Hussey with Zaner Ag Hedge. Joining us is Ted Seifried, our chief market strategist, who was just back from being on the Pro Farmer Crop Tour and is going to give us a quick rundown of what he saw, some of the numbers that we get to break to you today, and of course, our interpretation and more importantly, his interpretation of what he saw out on the tour. So before we start things off, happy birthday, Ted. It's a great day to be home, and I know wrapping up the tour, it's got to feel good to have both being your birthday, a Friday, and the last day of Pro Farmer. Being back home now, your rest this weekend is well deserved.
Yep, it's the first day in 5 years that I've actually been home on my birthday. So my kids appreciate that. It's nice not being in a La Quinta right now. So yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
I can absolutely imagine. Yeah, so we had Pro Farmer breaking their final numbers here. Do you want to start there and giving us a rundown of what they say for our national production this year?
Sure. For our national scale, they've got the corn production at 15.116 billion bushels. That's an average yield of 177 for, again, national average. And for soybeans, they have a production number of 4.438 billion bushels. That's an average yield of 51.2 bushels per acre. By the way, if that number sounds familiar, that's the same number we put out there shortly before the Pro Farmer Crop Tour happened. And, if you break that down to state level, they've got Iowa at 198 bushels an acre, Illinois at 212, Nebraska at 190, Minnesota 170. That's the one we're going to really talk about. Mm-hmm. Indiana, 200 bushels per acre. Indiana hits the 200 bushel per acre mark before Nebraska. Who would have thought? That's interesting. Yeah. It's an I state for sure, but it's not an irrigated I state. So anyways, interesting. Ohio, 190. Wow. South Dakota, 140. So, yeah, South Dakota is, dragging it down, as will North Dakota, as will northern Minnesota. Let's start with the Iowa number, right? 198. I think that is very accurate from what I've seen out of Iowa. And I have seen the western portion of Iowa with what we did here this past week. I was not on the east, but I have spent a fair amount of time in eastern Iowa. I think they're really spot on at that 198 for Iowa. For Illinois, I've been higher. For Illinois, I was thinking Illinois first. I was thinking 214 to 216, somewhere in that neighborhood. Which, by the way, the USDA is at 214. And our previous record for Illinois is at 210. So we're looking at a record crop in Illinois. It's just a question of how much of a record. I was surprised that Pro Farmer came in as low as they did on Illinois. I have feelings that maybe the Illinois number could be a little bit higher. But
it was still an impressive number, nevertheless, and led the way for production this year.
Oh, absolutely. But we knew that Illinois was going to be the state that really knocked it out of the park. When we saw the Illinois individual data numbers, not the yield estimate, but just the raw data that we saw for Illinois, I was surprised that ear length was down. I was surprised at what the yields were that were pulled from the tour. And I knew that was coming. I knew that their Illinois number was going to be a little bit smaller than mine, and it was going to be, I thought it could possibly be right on top of the USDA or a little bit below. So I think the Illinois number is very interesting. I want to see how that plays out. Now, Nebraska, 190. I'm right there with that. Although their comments are a little bit different than mine. When we talk about Nebraska, we always talk about dry land versus irrigated. And it's, the irrigated is pretty consistent year over year as far as what we see. The dry land is the one that really has the variability, to use the catchphrase everybody likes to use around the crop tour. The dry land this year was all over the place. We saw some really good fields. We saw some really bad fields. Mm-hmm. The biggest surprise for me in Nebraska was that a lot of the irrigated fields weren't as good as what they have been in years past. You were seeing issues in some of those irrigated fields that you don't expect to see in irrigated fields, like some pretty significant amount of tip back and some pollination issues. When you're underwater like that, you shouldn't really have those. However, you think about the timing of the really intense heat that they had, and what that was suggesting was that even with the irrigation, that heat really did have an impact. Nevertheless, 190 bushel per acre for Nebraska overall is a good number, and I don't disagree with it. Indiana, 200 bushel per acre. Like we said, wow, that's a big number. Again, I wasn't on the Eastern tour. I've been through parts of Indiana. I'm not going to disagree with that number at all. I think that it's a lofty number. It's a high number, but I think Indiana deserves it. Ohio, I haven't spent any time in. I had to really rely on what guys were saying at 190 bushels per acre. It sounds right, from pictures and recaps that I've gotten from these guys. And in South Dakota, 140 bushel per acre. That was a number. By the way, I'm saving Minnesota for last. That was a number, that 140 for South Dakota. That was a number that I thought was going to end up higher before I left to go on crop tour. But going through South Dakota and spending a couple extra days in South Dakota before actually starting the tour, me personally, I'm not going to disagree. I think that number could end up a little bit higher, but it wasn't as good as I thought it would have been. I thought, hey, maybe they've caught some rains in the past few weeks, a little bit here, a little bit there, that the state as a whole might pick up a little bit. I don't think so. South Dakota is going to be a drag. Now, Minnesota, as I've been saying when we talked earlier in the week and really any of the media that I've been doing, the day 4, the Minnesota leg of the tour was the one that I was really highly anticipating, because that was the one that in my mind was really going to make or break the idea that I had on what this national average yield is going to be. And I am going to say that Minnesota looked much better than not only what the crop conditions are suggesting, not only, but also what the USDA's number for Minnesota is. I think the USDA is too low on Minnesota. And Pro Farmer's agreeing with me. They've got Minnesota 170 bushel per acre. I very much think that is right for corn. You go into fields in Minnesota. Yes, you go further north. There's some really bad areas in Minnesota. Before everybody gets mad at me for saying Minnesota looks better than expected, there is some terrible corn in Nebraska, and you feel bad for those guys. However, the big producing areas, they look really good. The plants themselves look like they're really drying down. You look at that field from the road and you say, oh, wow, it's going to be a 172, 180 maybe. And you get in there and you look at the really dry, cracked earth. Like, wow, it's really dry. And it is really dry right now. But then you start pulling ears and you do an ear count. The stand was, for the most part, really good. Ear count, really good. Grain length, solid. They didn't have major pollination issues. And you end up with a 205 bushel yield when you thought it was a something in the 170s. Yeah. I will say they need rain right now, right, to finish filling out. But that's a much bigger problem for the soybeans. So I'm agreeing with Pro Farmer with really pushing Minnesota or not cutting them down as much as the USDA. So back to the national number for corn, 177 bushel per acre. I was talking to some of the pro farmers last night and wanted to know what my opinion was on it. And I gave them a number, as I do pretty much every year. And I said 177.4. Going into crop tour, I was thinking 178, 179, but I'm a 177.4. I think the reason my number is just slightly higher is because of that Illinois number. Now, I feel really good about what Pro Farmer had to say about the corn. I feel really good about what the tour did. I mean, the Eastern guys did what they had to do. The Western guys, that's where the big heavy lifting was this year, I think did a really great job of collecting samples and just getting that raw data. And I think the way the USD, the way the Pro Farmer put their spin on it, it makes a lot of sense to me. Unlike last year, where I had a whole lot of problems with what their numbers were. Now, for soybeans, again, 51.2. I'm not going to go through the state by state on soybeans because it's a pretty similar.
You're right.
It's a pretty similar
counting
thing.
Pods here, filling it out is another story, right? And finishing that crop right now. So,
yeah. So state by state, similar to corn, whatever. But the big thing about soybeans is that the corn for the most part is rain. Yes, we need another rain to continue to fill out, but the plus or minus on corn isn't going to be that terribly big at this point. For soybeans, that's a much different story, right? Soybeans, 51.2, which again, that's Pro Farmer's number. That was my number before going on tour, and I didn't see anything on tour to make me change that number. So it's the same number I suggested last night. But that number is the one that can really change. This could still be a 49 national average yield. It could still be a 52.5. The upside potential, I think, is somewhat limited because of how dry we are right now. So maybe not 52.5, maybe 52 at the most. But that is the number, 51.2. That is the number that could come down, and it could come down to where the USDA is. But the markets might not like that 51.2 number for soybeans. That's a little bit more bearish than what the USDA had to say. A little bit more production, possibly a little bit less of a tight balance sheet. So that is something. Of those two numbers, I mean, that's the one that I think we're going to be watching more closely. But either way, it's not. These numbers weren't overwhelmingly bullish like the USDA was two Thursdays ago.
Yeah, and I think the market responded here, trading a little heavily, getting and settling below 540 for December corn. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at the charts. We did take a dive below.
Looking at them right now, Dan. But hey, before these numbers came out after the close today. It was an embargo, media embargo till 1:30. So the trade didn't see that until after the close on Friday. I think this could be a little bit heavy for Monday.
Sure.
But we already beat them up pretty good going in. And I will say this: I think the trade had an idea that
they were ready
numbers
for
were coming higher because of what we were seeing on the nightly data. The big deal on Friday for the heaviness that we saw in the market was the RVO, EPA recommending that we cut back biofuel mandates to lower than what we had in 2020, but pre-2020 levels.
Right.
This is a Biden administration that all of us that are fans of biofuel were excited that we were going to see an expansion of renewable resources. And we're going the other way with that. This is a very pro-oil administration, apparently.
This is the second time that we've seen walkbacks on those types of numbers and mandates.
Keeps happening, yeah. It's not good.
So one time's isn't a trend, but twice now we've got a trend of this administration doing that, and that's unfortunate. It absolutely is. Now,
more than twice.
Now, like you said with the soybeans, it's much more variable, and I think it would speak to what you saw maybe in Indiana, where your corn production was so strong here, and yet the beans, we were behind here year over year and behind our 3-year average there on the bean and the pod count. Obviously, it's early; that can change. But hey, if pods aren't there, it's harder to fill out a plant with more beans, right? And like you said, the dryness here that we're continuing to have, and without any relief rain, could help continue to knock that down. Was there anything else you saw in terms of beans that could keep this from pushing back up to that 52 bushels an acre?
Well, yeah, when we talk about Minnesota, and this is much the same for Iowa, even the good parts of Iowa, really all of the West.
Sure.
When you saw a good corn and bean field, not necessarily next to each other, but when you're in areas where you're looking at high pod counts, you're also going into that cornfield, not right next to it, and seeing big cracks in the dirt. Meaning the moisture they had came early, really helped the corn out. The beans got there, but are really now at a point where they need follow-up rains immediately. Otherwise, they will start aborting pods, and we were already starting to see that. So this is a lot of times this time of year we'll go on tour and we'll say, hey, we're still adding pods. I didn't see any of that in the West. There's some talk of that on the East. I didn't see any of it in the West. So we're not adding to that. We're not adding pods. Now we can still add to the yield by adding weight, but we're not adding pods, and we are actually going backwards somewhat by the day that we don't get rain. Now, of course, a big feature of the market towards the end of this week was that you've got rain in the forecast, and the confidence is growing. And if that rain happens and we get really decent totals, well, that I'm not going to say that's it for soybeans, but it will go a very long way to keeping the potential that's out there right now intact.
And like you said, this is probably has more of a ceiling on the bean number now, given that the current pod counts and what you saw in the field. Getting stretching that beyond 51.8, 52 is probably a little out of the target right now, which is certainly something the trade's going to have to consider coming into Monday. Well,
Yeah.
Ted.
And one last thing, Dan. I mean, we can talk about rain, we can talk about pro farmer numbers, we can talk about, the renewable fuels. Seasonally, we go and make harvest lows right now. It doesn't really matter what triggers that. I mean, we certainly have the triggers. We just talked about them. But this is when we go make harvest lows. And when we do that, we get that demand cooking again. And then we have a reason to rally sometimes. Most of the time, we have a post-harvest rally. Now, this is a year because of the tighter balance sheets and the fact we just talked about. These yield numbers, while they may come up a little bit from USDA, we're not adding a ton to the crop at this point. So even if it is a 177 and a 51.2, we're not adding to that at this point, right? So yes, we come down, we make harvest lows. We do that most years. We did it in 2012 for that matter. And then we get that demand cooking, then we rally. And so I think this is very healthy for the market. I think there's a lot of people upset that, beans were down almost 30 cents today, corn almost 15. But again, I think this is a very healthy and timely thing for the markets to be doing. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there at the end.
Absolutely. And, to that point, we didn't see a flash sale out of China today. Could have been, holding back, waiting for this number to come out, right? And certainly a drop here on the board would help entice them to come back. This would be the first day out of the 11 days worth of flash sales we've seen, which was impressive in and of itself, keeping exports on pace and doing what we want to see. But obviously, lower prices here would encourage a little bit more of that into the future here. So, like Ted mentioned, we did dip below $13 here to finish the day in November beans. The 1240 area, lows of June, 1241, 200-day moving average are just below us. Seems like a healthy place to try to formulate a harvest low if it wants to get down there. And like Ted said, almost 15 cents down here for December corn, and really just right back into the middle of the range that we've been in. The low end of that range in the low fives, the high end unable to break above $6, finding our way to $5.37 into the end of the day, just puts us back into no man's land and in the range we've been in for several months. So when all is said and done, neither market really breaking down more than within the ranges we've been in. So you can't really say that we've had a massive slide here or a break that maybe wasn't unnecessary. Well, Ted, thanks for joining us. We'll let you get back to enjoying your birthday. I know you've had a long crop tour here, and glad you're at home safe. So check Ted out on Twitter at the Ted Spread here. You can find me as well. And also give us a call over here at Zaner, 312-277-0050. We can always be reached to have a chat with you about our marketing strategies that we'd love to put to work for you. Well, thanks again, Ted, and happy birthday. And until next time, everybody, we'll be back with you as price action develops. Take care, everyone. And
All right.
we're clear.
Good job.
Thanks, man.